I always believed family was forever, until my adopted brother proved me devastatingly wrong. He didn't just take my inheritance, he stole my trust, my past, and nearly my future. Today, I'm finally ready to expose the heartbreaking details of how he betrayed me. This isn't just a tale of financial theft, it's a story of shattered bonds, hidden resentments, and the long road to reclaiming one's life after betrayal. As I sit here, reflecting on those painful years, I hope sharing this will help others see the signs before it's too late. I was 6 years old when my parents adopted my brother, Daniel. He was 5 at the time, a year younger than me, but in those early moments, he seemed so much smaller, so much more fragile. I remember sitting on our front porch in the warm summer sun, clutching a toy car in one hand, a bright red race car that I'd gotten for my last birthday. The porch swing creaked gently under me as I waited, my legs dangling, too short to touch the ground. My parents had been gone all day, and I was buzzing with anticipation. They'd told me they were bringing home a surprise, something that would change our family forever. When their old blue station wagon finally pulled into the driveway, kicking up a little dust from the gravel, I jumped up and ran toward them. My mom stepped out first, her face beaming with that soft, maternal glow she always had. Then my dad opened the back door, and there he was, Daniel. He had the saddest eyes I'd ever seen, wide, cautious, almost haunted, as if he'd already lived through things most kids never should. His clothes were a bit too big, hand-me-downs probably, and he clutched a small backpack like it was his only lifeline. My mom knelt down beside him and said, "This is your new brother, honey. Daniel, meet your big brother." I didn't hesitate. I was excited. I'd always wanted a sibling to play with, to share adventures with. I reached out and held his hand, feeling how cold and small it was in mine. "Come on," I said, tugging him gently toward the house. "I'll show you my room. We can share my toys." He didn't say much at first, just nodded, but in that moment, I didn't care that he wasn't really my brother by blood. From that instant, in my innocent child's mind, he was family, irrevocably, unconditionally. For years, I did everything I could to make him feel at home. We shared toys, trading action figures and building forts out of blankets in the living room on rainy days. We even shared a bedroom for a while, bunk beds stacked high with pillows and stuffed animals. Our birthday parties were always joint affairs in the summer, since our birthdays were only a month apart, mine in June, his in July. We'd invite the whole neighborhood, with cake and games in the backyard, and I'd make sure he got just as many presents as I did, even if it meant sharing some of mine. I defended him at school when other kids teased him about being adopted. There was this one bully, Tommy from down the street, who'd corner Daniel in the playground and say cruel things like, "You're not really part of their family, you're just a charity case." I'd step in every time, puffing out my chest despite being scared myself, and tell Tommy to back off. Once, it even led to a scuffle, and I came home with a black eye. My parents grounded me, but Daniel looked at me that night with something like gratitude in his eyes. When he cried at night, and he did often those first few years, probably from memories of whatever had happened before, I'd sneak into his room with my blanket and sleep on the floor so he wouldn't feel alone. I'd whisper stories about superheroes and adventures until his breathing evened out. We had our share of fun, too. Summers were spent riding bikes around the neighborhood, exploring the nearby woods, and building tree houses from scrap wood my dad brought home from work. Winters meant snowball fights and hot chocolate by the fire. I thought we had built something unbreakable, a bond forged not just from shared experiences, but from deliberate acts of kindness and loyalty. Daniel wasn't just my brother, he was my partner in crime, my confidant. Or so I believed. But I was wrong. So very, very wrong. Looking back now, with the clarity of hindsight, there were subtle signs of resentment that I never picked up on, or perhaps chose not to see. Daniel would sometimes say things like, "Well, you're their real kid, so of course they give you more." At the time, I brushed it off as typical sibling bickering, the kind of harmless jealousy that flares up and fades away. I'd laugh and say, "Nah, we're the same. Come on, let's go play." On Christmas mornings, he'd complain that my gifts were better. I remember one year in particular. I got a new video game console, something I'd been begging for all year, and Daniel got a set of art supplies. He pouted the whole day, barely touching his presents, muttering about how unfair it was. My parents tried to explain that the gifts were chosen based on our interests. I loved games, he loved drawing, but he wouldn't hear it. "You always get the cool stuff," he'd say, his voice laced with an edge that made me uncomfortable. When relatives visited, like our grandparents or aunts and uncles during holidays, He'd sulk if they complimented me more than him. Grandma would ruffle my hair and say, "Look at you growing so tall and smart." And Daniel would retreat to his room, slamming the door just a bit too hard. I'd follow him sometimes, trying to cheer him up with a joke or an invitation to play outside, but he'd just glare and say, "They like you better because you're blood." And whenever my parents praised me for good grades or sports achievements, like when I made the school soccer team in middle school, he'd mutter under his breath that nobody noticed his efforts. He wasn't as athletic or academic as I was, but he had talents. He could draw amazing comics and had a knack for fixing things around the house. I'd point that out, saying, "Mom and Dad love your drawings. Remember how Dad framed that one of the family?" But it never seemed to land. His responses grew sharper over time, laced with bitterness that I attributed to teenage angst. I thought he was just insecure, perhaps still carrying scars from his early life before adoption. I tried harder to include him, to make sure he felt equal. I'd share my allowance, invite him to hang out with my friends, even let him win at games sometimes just to see him smile. But no matter what I did, it never seemed enough. The cracks were there, widening slowly, invisibly, like fissures in ice before a collapse. I didn't realize then that these small moments were building towards something catastrophic. My parents weren't wealthy by any stretch. They didn't drive fancy cars or take lavish vacations, but they had worked hard their whole lives to build something stable for us. My dad was an accountant at a local firm, crunching numbers day in and day out, while my mom taught elementary school, shaping young minds with patience and kindness. They believed in the value of hard work, saving diligently, and planning for the future. Education was paramount in their eyes, but so was financial security. They often quoted sayings like, "A penny saved is a penny earned," and emphasized the importance of legacy. When I was in college, pursuing a degree in business administration, my parents sat me down one evening after dinner for a serious talk. The kitchen table was cleared of plates, and my dad pulled out a folder of documents, his face solemn but reassuring. They explained their estate plan in detail, something they'd been working on with a lawyer for years. They had set aside money and assets, not millions but a comfortable sum, savings accounts, a modest investment portfolio in stocks and bonds, and the family home, which they'd paid off after decades of mortgages. They believed in dividing things fairly, but also in tailoring support to needs. A portion was earmarked specifically for me: my college fund, which had helped cover tuition without loans; the house, which they envisioned as a starter home for me one day; and some investments already in my name to give me a head start after graduation. "We want you to have stability," my mom said, her hand on mine. "You've worked hard, and this is our way of helping you build on that." At the time, Daniel was struggling more visibly. He'd enrolled in community college, but dropped out after a semester, citing boredom and a lack of direction. He bounced between jobs: retail clerk, delivery driver, even a stint at a mechanic's shop, never staying long enough to advance. My parents expressed concern, but remained optimistic. "We're still figuring out how to help him," my dad said that night. "He'll find his path. We believe in him, just like we believe in you. But for now, we've set things up this way to ensure both of you are taken care of." I never questioned it. I assumed when the time came, hopefully far in the future, everything would be divided fairly, with adjustments as needed. We were family. After all, what could go wrong? I hugged them both that night, grateful for their foresight, and went back to my studies, oblivious to the storm brewing. Years later, life had moved on. I'd graduated, landed a steady job in marketing, and was building my own life. Daniel, meanwhile, had drifted further, living in a small apartment and working odd jobs. Then, tragedy struck. My father passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. He was only 62, fit and active, but it happened suddenly during a morning jog. The loss hit us all hard, my mom especially, who seemed to age overnight. In the midst of grief, practical matters loomed. A few weeks after the funeral, my mother and I met with the family lawyer in his cramped office downtown. The room smelled of old books and coffee, and I sat there clutching a tissue, still raw from the services. I wasn't worried about the estate. My parents had been transparent with me, and I trusted the process. This was just a formality to ensure my mom was secure. But the lawyer's words felt like a gut punch, knocking the air from my lungs. He adjusted his glasses and said, "Most of the assets, including the house and the accounts, have already been transferred." I frowned, my mind foggy with confusion. "Transferred? To who?" He hesitated, glancing at my mom before replying. "To your brother, Daniel." At first, I thought it was some clerical mistake, a mix-up in paperwork. I laughed nervously, waiting for him to correct himself, to say it was a joke or an error. But he slid papers across the table, documents with my signature on them, authorizing transfers of deeds, accounts, everything. Except, I had never signed them. My heart pounded as I stared at the pages, the ink mocking me. The room spun. I remember my mother gasping, clutching her chest as if she'd been struck. "This can't be right," she whispered. I kept shaking my head, whispering, "This isn't possible. I didn't sign this." My voice rose in pitch, panic setting in. But the signatures looked eerily like mine, perfect forgeries, down to the loop in my Y and the slant of my S. "How? When?" The lawyer explained that the transfers had happened months ago, quietly, without fanfare. My world tilted, and I felt like I was falling into an abyss. That evening, I drove straight to Daniel's apartment, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that mirrored the darkness. In my heart, I banged on his door until he opened it, his face impassive, as if he'd been expecting me. When I confronted him, shoving the papers in his face, he didn't deny it. He just shrugged, leaning against the doorframe with a casualness that infuriated me. "What do you want me to say?" he asked, his tone flat. "You stole everything. You forged my name." I yelled, my voice breaking. "You've always had everything," he said coldly, his eyes narrowing. "This time, it's my turn." I was speechless, the words stuck in my throat like shards of glass. This was the boy I had defended on the playground, the brother I had shared every holiday with, the person I once considered my best friend. And now he was looking me dead in the eyes, admitting he had stolen my future without a hint of remorse. "You forged my name," I whispered again, hoping for some crack in his facade, some sign of the brother I knew. "You'll survive," he sneered, crossing his arms. "You've always been the favorite. You'll bounce back. But me? I deserve this. I've lived in your shadow long enough, watching you get the praise, the opportunities, the love. This evens the score." His words cut deeper than any knife. It wasn't just about the money. It was the revelation that our entire relationship had been a lie in his eyes. He saw me not as a brother, but as an enemy, a rival for affection that I never knew we were competing for. My mother was devastated, her world crumbling around her. She couldn't fathom that the son she had raised as her own, the boy she'd rocked to sleep and bandaged knees for, would do this. She called him repeatedly, her voice trembling on the phone, begging him to return what he took, to make it right for the sake of the family. "Please, Daniel," she'd plead, tears streaming. "This isn't you. We can fix this." He refused every time, hanging up or ignoring her calls altogether. Family gatherings became unbearable ghosts of what they once were. Holidays like Thanksgiving, which used to be filled with laughter and turkey, now felt hollow. My mom sat in silence at the table, pushing food around her plate, crying quietly when she thought I wasn't looking. My father's absence loomed over us like a storm cloud, and Daniel's betrayal tore open wounds that wouldn't heal, infecting every memory with pain. For weeks, I was numb, going through the motions of daily life like a zombie. I couldn't eat, my appetite vanished under the weight of stress. I couldn't sleep, lying awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction with Daniel, searching for clues I'd missed. Anger boiled inside me, mixed with grief, not just for the lost inheritance, but for the lost brother. I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air in a sea of betrayal. Friends tried to help, offering words of support, but it felt empty. "Family isn't always blood," they'd say, but that only reminded me how blood hadn't mattered to me, yet it had poisoned everything for him. With the help of the lawyer, a kind but no-nonsense man named Mr. Hargrove who'd known my family for years, I started piecing together the puzzle of how Daniel had pulled it off. It was a painstaking process, sifting through bank statements, emails, and legal records in his cluttered office. We discovered he'd started months before Dad's death, perhaps sensing an opportunity in our parents' aging. The forgeries were sophisticated. He'd practiced my signature, likely from old checks or cards I'd signed. He'd contacted banks posing as me, using personal details only a brother would know. My birth date, social security number snippets, even inside jokes from childhood to verify identity. As we dug deeper, the courtroom loomed. Daniel hired a slick lawyer who painted me as the jealous one. "Isn't it true you were always the parents' favorite? That you received better gifts, more attention?" the lawyer asked during deposition. I clenched my fists under the table. I was never treated better. My parents loved us equally. He smirked. "So you deny that your parents ever expressed frustration with Daniel's failures?" that they might have wanted to ensure he was financially secure. I froze. Because yes, my parents had worried about him privately, late-night conversations I'd overheard about his job instability, his lack of direction. But twisting that concern into justification for theft? It was unbearable, a perversion of their love. Then came the evidence. My lawyer brought in handwriting experts who testified in dry, technical terms about the inconsistencies in the signatures, the subtle differences in pressure, the unnatural flow of ink that proved the documents weren't mine. We submitted emails showing Daniel had contacted banks and notaries, pretending to act on my behalf, using IP addresses traced to his apartment. At one point, the judge looked directly at him and asked, "Did you forge these documents?" Daniel didn't flinch. "No, Your Honor. My brother is lying because he can't stand the thought of me having anything." His coldness sent a chill through me. It was like staring at a stranger, not the boy I grew up with. The brother who'd once built snowmen with me was gone, replaced by this calculating thief. The lowest moment came during cross-examination in the packed courtroom, the air thick with tension. Daniel's lawyer presented old family photos, Christmas mornings with wrapping paper strewn everywhere, birthdays with candles flickering, vacations at the beach with sandcastles and sunburns. "Look," he said, projecting a picture of me opening a new bike while Daniel sat in the background with a smaller toy. "Isn't it clear this family prioritized one child over the other?" I wanted to scream from the stand. Those photos weren't evidence of favoritism. They were snapshots of joy, of a family trying its best. But in that sterile courtroom, twisted under his narrative, they looked like proof of inequality, like indictments of my parents' love. I broke down on the stand, tears spilling as I whispered, "He was my brother. I loved him. I never thought he'd do this to me." The words echoed in the quiet room, and for the first time, I saw the judge's expression soften, a flicker of empathy in her eyes. The jury shifted uncomfortably, and even Daniel averted his gaze for a moment. The trial dragged on, each day a battle of emotions and evidence. I'd leave the courthouse exhausted, my mom leaning on me for support, her frail frame a reminder of how much this had aged her. Weeks turned into months, a grueling marathon of hearings and arguments. Every appearance drained me, but eventually, piece by piece, the truth emerged like light-piercing fog. The notary who had witnessed my signatures admitted under oath that she'd never actually seen me sign. She'd been paid off, a fact uncovered through financial records. Bank statements showed unusual activity linked directly to Daniel, withdrawals in cash, transfers to offshore accounts. The handwriting analysis sealed it, irrefutable proof that swung the case. The judge ruled that much of what he took had to be returned, accounts frozen, assets seized. Some were already liquidated, some hidden in ways we couldn't trace, some gone forever to pay his legal fees. But still, it was a partial victory, a validation that I wasn't crazy. Daniel didn't even flinch when the verdict was read. He simply leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, like this was just another inconvenience in his day. No apology, no remorse, just a cold stare as he was led away. Winning in court didn't feel like winning. Yes, I got some of the inheritance back, a portion of the savings, investments recouped through liquidation, but the damage was permanent. The financial wound was deep, forcing me to rebuild from scratch, but the emotional scar was worse, a gaping hole where trust used to be. I started therapy shortly after, recommended by a friend who saw how broken I was. The first session, in a cozy office with soft lighting and tissues at the ready, I broke down within minutes. "How do you move on?" I asked the therapist, my voice hoarse from crying, "when the person you trusted most destroyed you?" She listened patiently, then said, "Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to live with the pain without letting it define you. It's about rebuilding boundaries and finding strength in vulnerability." But it wasn't easy. For months, I couldn't trust anyone. Every time a friend offered help, I second-guessed their motives. Were they genuine or waiting to betray me? Every time I signed a document, even something mundane like a work form, I checked it 10 times over, paranoia lingering like a shadow. Financially, I had to start over from square one. The house my parents wanted me to have was gone for good, sold off by Daniel before we could stop it. I rented a small apartment in a quiet suburb, cutting expenses wherever I could. No more dining out, no vacations, just bare essentials. I worked extra hours at my job, taking on side gigs like freelance consulting, each dollar I saved feeling like reclaiming a piece of what he stole. It was humbling, exhausting, but it built resilience I didn't know I had. My mother rarely speaks of Daniel now. When she does, her voice cracks, eyes distant. She once told me over tea in her kitchen, "It feels like I buried two sons. Your father and now him." The pain in her words broke my heart anew. She still loves him, deep down. Mother's love doesn't vanish easily, but she can't forgive what he did. Neither can I. We've grown closer through this, supporting each other in quiet ways. Weekly dinners, walks in the park, sharing memories of Dad. Holidays are quiet now, empty without the chaos of family. We set fewer plates at the table, the laughter that used to fill the room replaced by reflective silence. No more big gatherings, just Mom and me, sometimes a friend or two, toasting to survival. It's been years since the case ended. I'd like to say I've completely healed, but that would be a lie. Some nights I still wake up angry, replaying his smirk in my head, wondering what if I'd seen the signs earlier. Other nights I just feel numb, the betrayal a dull ache. But I'm rebuilding. Slowly, deliberately. I found purpose in warning others, friends, co-workers, even strangers online, about the importance of safeguarding finances, even from family. I advocate for regular estate reviews, two-factor authentication on accounts, and open discussions about inheritance to prevent such horrors. I've taken steps to secure my future legally, a new will, trusts in place, so no one can ever pull the same trick again. I've even started investing wisely, turning the remnants of my inheritance into something growing, something mine. Most importantly, I've learned that closure doesn't come from revenge or court rulings. It comes from reclaiming control over your own life, choosing forgiveness not for him, but for myself, to free up space for joy. Daniel may have stolen money, but I refuse to let him steal who I am. A survivor, a brother who loved deeply, a man who won't be defined by betrayal. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: love your family fiercely, but protect yourself wisely. Because sometimes, the person you'd trust with your life will be the one who ruins it. Verify documents, communicate openly about estates, and never ignore those subtle cracks in relationships. They might signal a fracture waiting to break wide open. I'll never fully understand why he did it. Maybe greed, fueled by years of perceived slights. Maybe resentment, rooted in his early traumas that I couldn't erase. Maybe both, intertwined in a toxic web. But I've accepted I may never get an answer. And maybe that's okay. Because sometimes survival itself is the victory, the quiet triumph of rising from ashes, stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever comes next. Thank you for watching to the end. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notification so you get notified when I upload more videos. I hope you learned something from my story. See you on the next one.